Hello everyone, friends. Today, in this video lesson, I will show you how to paint flowers like these on a small canvas with a light 3D effect, creating a sense of depth of field, where the background is out of focus and the foreground is rendered sharply. I used oil paints and I selected the colors for my small painting. So, light green, dark green, and grass green if we're talking about oil paints. Next, cadmium yellow light, and then permanent crimson. We will also need a blue color. I used phthalo blue. And of course, white paint. And if you are going to paint with acrylics, choose similar colors, mix them, and select the necessary shades. But remember that acrylic dries quickly, so you'll need to blend the paints on the canvas right away before it dries, especially in areas where you need to mix and blend them. As a solvent, I use odorless thinner for oil painting. I bought these small canvases. They are sold together with a stand, a little mini easel like this. It looks really cute and is easy to assemble. You end up with a beautiful composition like this. Such a mini canvas can make a great gift or serve as a decorative item in your interior, a beautiful ornament. Instead of photo frames, you can place a small easel with a canvas. Of course, you can use any canvas for this purpose. Next, I'm showing you the brushes, friends, that I used. All my brushes are synthetic. This last fluffy brush is actually a makeup brush. It's very convenient for blending. Before we start, take a photo of the reference image or make a screenshot. This is the picture we'll use to paint our little canvas. Look, I'm mixing dark paints. Right now it's dark green, green, and a little bit of blue. And now I want to mark the locations of the light buds, so I don't paint over them with the dark color. And we'll paint the whole field around them with dark colors now, especially the darkest areas. So accordingly, I make them slightly different shades, some a bit darker, some a bit lighter, and I slowly fill in the entire field, except for those white spots on the canvas that we'll leave for the flowers. While we're filling in the dark areas, a few words about brushes. I'm using synthetic brushes, as I mentioned before, and in this work, a bit later, you'll see I'll also need a so-called angled brush. I highly recommend getting one. And make sure to get some liner brushes as well. These are very thin brushes that allow you to work with fine details. Right now, we're filling in our area so that we can later carefully blend it, creating blurred, diffused spots in the background that will help us achieve a depth of field effect. Notice that I'm not painting the entire area with a single color. From time to time, I add lighter tones, more bluish or more greenish shades. Now I've started adding some light green shades. This is to create the sense that even in the background, there are not only dark shadowy areas but also hints of leaves, flowers, or some grass out of focus in the distance. And even at this stage, with just these spots, we're already establishing the background using different colors. Look, I'm even adding a lot of yellow to create that sense of freshness, to show fresh greenery. I use very, very little paint thinner. Literally, at the very beginning, I just slightly moisten the brush so it would be damp, but I never make it too watery. That is, the paint on the canvas, especially the background, shouldn't be watery, so that we can blend everything nicely later, so that it's workable and doesn't run or let the white of the canvas show through. And now I'm going to take a makeup brush to carefully blend the background. You can use any fluffy brush if you don't have a makeup brush like this. So, to blend, we try to move carefully with tapping motions. Our goal is not to mix everything into a single blotch, but to connect the edges of the spots. That is, we have a dark spot and a yellow spot. We need to go along the border of these spots with tapping, patting motions to blend them together. That is, so that the edges of the spots are blurred, but the boundaries are still visible. This is exactly how the blur effect works. Look, I have a clean cloth in my hand, and from time to time I wipe my brush on this cloth to avoid any dirt. Now I want to add some light spots to the background and add a few highlights. For this I took the synthetic brush again, the one I used at the beginning. I wiped it, cleaned it a little, and now I'm adding light spots. Then I'll blend them in as well, smudging them into the background. You see? Friends, if you're working with acrylics, you need to blend right away. As soon as you put the acrylic on the canvas, it dries quickly. And to achieve this effect of a blended background, you need to blend it right away. It will be a bit harder to add anything there later. We're almost done with the background now. I'm adding a few more light highlights, blending them in, and next we'll start painting the flowers in the distance, which are also out of focus. For this, we'll take a clean brush and start applying a dark shade. Because take a look at our flowers. Every individual flower bud features a distinctly dark bottom and a much lighter top, so even for those that are out of focus, we'll set the same color mood. That is, we'll darken the bottom and lighten the top. Look, where it's dark, I'll even add colors like green, maybe even blue, to darken it and make the shadow area as deep as possible, right? And where it's light on top, we add a very bright and luminous white highlight. I meticulously work with these tiny little individual spots, and then I carefully blend them out again using a soft and fluffy makeup brush, literally tapping and stippling them repeatedly in one specific place. This is so that it doesn't get smeared and so that everything we're trying to do, light on top, dark on the bottom, doesn't blend into a single average spot so that this difference still remains. That's it. So, as you can see, I work carefully with little spots. It's better to have several different makeup brushes because we were working with green paint and it would make a mess now on these white, light areas on the flowers. So either clean it thoroughly or have several brushes. You can order these kinds of brushes on any marketplace. They're inexpensive. Just order the most basic, cheapest set of makeup brushes. You can replace them from time to time if the brushes become unusable, but it's a very suitable option. Moreover, such sets usually include brushes of different sizes, so you can use them for different tasks and different canvases. Often, when working on a single piece or canvas, you need two makeup brushes, one for dark shades and another for light ones, to avoid muddiness. That's why it's much more convenient to solve this with a set. Look, I continue to apply the flower areas in patches, and where it should be darker, I don't hesitate to mix red, even with a bit of greenish color. And then, to highlight those light accents, like the tips of the petals, look, I took an angled brush and I use it in a very clever way. I try to keep the white color on the very edge of the brush, right at the tip on the cut of the brush, while leaving the pink and reddish colors in the middle. And you get these sharp little tips. Nevertheless, I blend this flower. Why? Because according to our plan, it's out of focus, you see? And I blended it very carefully so as not to smear everything into a single blot, to preserve some structure of the flower but not make it fully readable. The next flower I will work out in more detail and more clearly because it will be in focus. It will be one of the main highlights of our composition, right? That is, it will be clearly visible in the foreground. And look, I literally apply the zones of the flower with little spots. If we look at the reference, you can see that there are both green centers and dark red ones. I'm trying to repeat kind of the same base layer, right? And all these pretty crisp little white details I leave for the final stage. Now look, again I pick up pink paint with this angled brush, and on the tip of the brush I take some white. See, look, again, it's pink and white. And that's how we get these sharp white edges, but with pinkish extensions of the petals. If you don't have this kind of brush right now or couldn't find one available, you can get liners instead. Those are just regular thin brushes. So try to repeat the same trick with any thin brush. So your goal is to leave a pure white color at the tips. For example, you can first apply the pink petals and then go over the tips with pure white using a thin brush. Notice that when I apply these petals, I also try to maintain the direction and length of the petals. Some of the petals, even in the reference, are shorter, some stick straight down or to the side, and some point upwards. I try to repeat all these patterns so the flower looks more realistic. Take a look. For drawing the details, I'm now using a liner brush. This is a very thin brush. I apply white highlights with the liner brush. I have several such brushes in my toolkit. Some have longer bristles, some have shorter ones. Longer bristles are more convenient for painting things like long blades of grass and so on, so I also recommend getting some for yourself. I'll also share one secret and an important tip with you. All these white highlights, after the painting is finished, especially if it's done in oil, start to fade a little because the background is dark, and where the white touches the dark background, it mixes a bit with that paint, absorbs some of its color and becomes duller. And since these white highlights give a really nice brightness and realism to this little painting, it's great that once this mini canvas has dried a bit, in a day or two, once it's somewhat dry, you can go over these white highlights again with a thin liner brush, and your painting will literally come to life. Next, we move on to the following flowers. I also add some greenish accents with small dabs, which are present in the flower. At the bottom, it will be a darker red, kind of a red-pink shade, right? I used permanent red madder. By the way, I really love this color. There you go. And of course, we apply these sharp white petals with an angled brush, and they immediately bring the flower to life. And notice, when I work with such small details, I try not to disturb the boundary between the dark spots and the light accents. That is, I still try to preserve the dark center of the flower showing through in some places. We try to keep it. And we also carefully add these light accents on top without blending everything into a single spot. So here, the task is not so much to draw the petals perfectly evenly. By the way, I can't draw anything evenly at all. Everything I draw always ends up a little crooked like this. But here, the task is to make sure that where there is a dark spot, it remains a dark, shadowy spot, right? And where it's light, it should clearly stay light. As soon as they blend together, the effect of realism is lost. And here it's especially important for us to preserve this clarity of the drawing and the sharpness of the foreground. Look, I've already moved on to another neighboring flower and picked up the liner brush again to work on the fine details. And notice, I constantly wipe my brush on a dry cloth. I recommend you do the same. Why? Because when we're painting the flower, we touch the dark background. We end up with dark paint on the brush, then we dip it into the light pink or white paint, and as a result, the color becomes muddy, and you won't get a beautiful flower that way. So every time you go for the white paint in the palette, you really need to use a relatively clean brush so that you put relatively clean paint onto the canvas. For this purpose, I use roll towels that are sold in stores. It's a very convenient format, a very handy option. I also use these same towels to clean my brushes at the end of the work. That's it. You can also just use any old cotton rags you have at home. That's also a convenient option. Look, we're already finishing up our canvas. Here I'm adding stems and various leaves with light green paint. That's it. You can also add some neat highlights on the leaves here. As you can see, I added a bit of foliage. That's it. And now our painting has acquired a sort of 3D effect, where your gaze gets drawn in. You can see that there's a kind of blurred background in the back, while the flowers in the front are in sharp focus. Friends, this technique with the blurred background creates a very vivid, realistic effect. Moreover, let me tell you, I have a painting that's known for being sold before it even had a chance to dry. I painted it in just 1 hour. I had barely managed to upload it to a foreign gallery when it was instantly sold for €1,000. The painting became very popular, and later I even made a detailed video tutorial based on it, so that anyone interested could recreate this effect and paint this picture themselves. The link to this tutorial is in the description of this video. You can also find the link to the tutorial in the profile header under the tutorial section. Get a step-by-step guide to painting the picture and give it a try today.